Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. This is episode 281, Give Them Tools and Let Them Build Part 2. This is part 2 of a new series, which is based on a premise. We are not the music makers. Our students are. So are we teaching them songs, or are we teaching them the tools used to build songs? It is also based on a sub-premise, you might say, more of like an emotional premise, which is, who is the hardest working person in your classroom? Spoiler alert, it should not be you if you are the teacher. Now, if you're a student listening, I am talking to you. You should be the hardest working person in the room. The teacher's already done their work. They are there to guide yours. Now, if you missed part 1 of this series and you're just tuning in now and hearing this part 2 episode, that's silly. Go back and listen to part 1 first, and that's going to be very important. But in part 2, we begin to pack our toolbox. I review approaches to developing independent, confident musicians through tools-based pedagogy. We talk about what a tool is, distinguishing between tools and answers. We want to give them the tool, but if we give them the answer, then we become the tool as the teacher. We're drawing here from extensive research and classroom practice, not just mine, but of many folks. The focus is on shifting the teacher's role from the sole source of knowledge to a facilitator of skill transfer, encouraging students to become vocal explorers and self-sufficient problem solvers. The tools you are going to hear about later in this episode are Solfége, when I don't know what the note sounds like; Takadimi, when I don't know how the beat is supposed to be divided rhythmically; count singing, for when I'm not sure how long the note should last; functional vocal knowledge, when I'm not sure how to sing notes in that part of my voice. It's too high, it's too low, it's too breathy, all the things that would cause me to not be able to sing what I see or hear. Student self-diagnosis is a tool. Rehearsal sequencing and pacing is a tool. And of course, keeping data is the tool that tells you if all your other tools are working. So tune in, stick around all the way to the end, and have your thinking stimulated and challenged. Then head over to the Choralosopher's Facebook page and talk to me about which tools you already use and which ones you'd like to be better at using or use for the first time. Or even if you think my tools are dumb, come over and tell me over on the Choralosopher's Facebook page. And you can also read written versions and written blogs by myself and other contributors for free over at Substack, choralosophy.substack.com. And over the course of the next spring and summer of 2026, and anyone else listening to these in future years, my plan is to do future episodes on this series, one on each tool, a deep dive into the tool to create a really usable resource for you to be able to implement these things by the time school year starts again. So stick around for that. Choir directors, music educators, show planners, you pour your heart into your music. Shouldn't your events get the same attention? That's where Ludus comes in. Sell tickets, promote your concerts, and fundraise with ease. Selling merchandise and concessions? Ludus Retail makes in-person sales effortless. Running choir camps or workshops? They have a classes feature that keeps registration simple, and when you need help, the live support team is ready to pop up with real answers from real people. The best part? It's completely free for organizations. Thousands of music programs already trust Ludus because great music deserves more than just a ticketing system. Ensemble trips can be more than just a performance. They can build community, inspire artistry, and give students a reason to stay invested. That's why I recommend Kaleidoscope Adventures. For more than 30 years, Kaleidoscope has helped student groups travel with purpose, combining performance opportunities with experiences that deepen musical understanding and create lifelong memories. They'll help you find the right destination, the right venue, and the right balance of music, education, and fun. And they manage the planning from start to finish so you can focus on your job as an educator. To explore options for your choir, visit mykatrip.com or find the link in the show notes. A big shout out goes to the producers and Inner Circle over at the Patreon page. These are folks that are really dedicated to keeping the lights on here at this show. Venture Studios, Chandler Smith, Brian Long, Michael Herron, Kyle Peterson, Steve and Kathy Kakachik, David Kowalczyk, Max Jackson, Angie Schilling, Rebecca Chalk, RJ McCracken, Michael Shimp, and Kyle Siddons. True self-sufficiency is possible, but the piano will hold them back. We think it's speeding them up, but it'll hold them back. So instead of the piano, we use Solfége. That's the tool. So the way I present this for my kids is, because we use this verbiage in class too, the tools verbiage is very much part of my everyday class. I'll ask them, or you can show up and ask them, what do you use Solfége for? What's it for? Well, I don't know what the pitch sounds like. So that's how I know what the pitch sounds like, is I use Solfége. That's my tool. Because I don't know what that note sounds like, I use Solfége. So, for example, in my early teaching years, I would have probably looked at a piece of music that was do, re, mi stepwise, maybe the occasional do, mi, so, one chord arpeggio thing, and I would say, that is sight readable. The average kid, the typical kid could read that. But then I would look at a piece that has like major seventh leaps on eighth notes, and I would say, that's not sight readable. We need to practice that, or maybe I need to demonstrate that to them or something. That's outside of their capacity. It no longer is anymore, not even for my beginners, because I've taught them how to use Solfége to solve that problem. So for example, let's say we're having trouble getting from, while reading a new piece of music, we're having trouble getting from the low do to the high T, as an example. Well, that's a muscle coordination problem. First of all, because they're probably trying to go from a chest voice to a head voice of some kind, or there's all kinds of problems there. Plus, they don't intuitively know what that interval sounds like. So they're going to do things like this. They're going to go, do, T, do. Oh, that's not, was that T? No, that's not T. Okay, so how are you going to figure out what T is? Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. And I would just tell them to sing the scale a bunch of times. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. Okay, now can you go from do to T? Do, T, do, T, do, T, do. A bunch of times over and over and over, and then they're training their brain to do that part. I'm not doing it for them. They're using that tool to solve that mystery. Okay. Then, when they've been given enough time to do that, I will tell the class, okay, now we're going to go back and try it again. Can we do it in context? Usually they can't in context first. It takes several attempts, and that's the beauty of it, but they don't look at those intervals anymore and go, I can't do that. They go, I might need more tries to do that, which is a much better student response, I think. So the solution, I use movable do, but I don't think that's magic. I just do think that movable do, for me, is helpful because I'm also teaching music theory that way. I'm able to train it to them as a functional concept of do is home. Do represents the one chord, for example. That's why I do movable do. I had a student once graduate from my program and then go as a viola major at Boston Conservatory, where they do fixed do. And he called me in the third week of school crying that he was going to have to quit playing viola and his career was over and all things. I said, no, just learn a new language. I taught you a language. You're going to go to this place and learn a new language. And he stuck with it, and he's playing professionally now. So our Solfége, like I said before, these are the phonics of our language. The goal is that students sing before the context is provided. Okay? They try to provide the context. So when it's pitch mysteries, I don't play it for them or sing it for them. I ask them to solve that problem, and not always individually, sometimes as a group. They can work on it as collaboratively as a section, for example. They can have conversations, they can discuss how they're going to solve the problem, but they're going to work together and they're going to solve that problem. Sometimes, especially with the boys, because of the muscle coordination thing, it is harder for them. It is harder for them in 7th, 8th, 9th grade because of the muscle coordination. And so I do provide some other types of auditory support, but I still don't play the notes. So for example, an example of auditory support that I think is great for boys and girls, but in general I use it with the boys, is a cello drone. So we're in the key of D flat, and I go to YouTube, and there's like all these beautiful, rich, overtone-rich cello drones of D flats that last 6 or 7 minutes, which they think is hilarious now. Yep, and so I just let that go while we're doing our reading. Like if it's the key of D flat and we're doing our first read of a song, I'll just let that go, because what that's doing is that is training them, their muscles, not their ear. This is a lot of the mythology that we believe when kids can't match pitch, is that they can't hear. Oh, they can hear, and they know they're wrong, and they already think they're stupid. So let's not reinforce they can't hear. They're training their muscles constantly to return to that pitch. Then eventually I take it away and they sing in tune. Okay. So we want the singers to create the musical context when possible. Cello drones are great if you're having tuning problems. Eventually for me, by the time the boys are in 10th grade, that problem is gone. Okay, another one. I think sometimes rhythm errors are actually misdiagnosed also. They're caused by singers having to stop and think about what the pitch is. And a lot of singers will be pitch first. Like they won't want to go on until they know the note is right, and then that's going to create a pitch problem. But again, in my system, they're not wrong. They just have another tool to do. So they figured out the pitch, good job, but now let's make sure it's not late. Let's throw a Takadimi in there so that we can really hear the rhythm happening in our head too. So then they might do that and try to solve the rhythm problem. So can you see that okay? Okay, so anybody have perfect pitch? Because I don't. Thank you. Fantastic. So here's what I'm going to have you pretend like you are a ninth grader. Make some of the same mistakes that they would. Are you ready? It's SATB, just pick your favorite line. First thing I would have my kids do is we would sing a scale, because we're going to build our audio library for this exercise. It is our answer key. Okay, so follow my hands. So that's our scale, and now we're going to do a 1-chord arpeggio. Now a 4. Something 5-ish. So there's nothing magic about that specific pattern. That's just what my kids do, because it's going to be almost everything that we encounter in a sight reading factory level 2 kind of exercise. Okay. So then I would ask them to audiate the exercise. And by this point, I've taught them that that means that they are consciously hearing their notes in their head. And they use hand signs to prove to me that they're actually looking where they're supposed to be looking. That's how I grade their engagement, etc. So I would give them 20 seconds to audiate, and I would watch for their confusion / lack of engagement, and they would work through it with their hands. So please do that. Okay, now we're going to try it, but remember, you're going to make some intentionally ninth grade mistakes. Okay, here we go. And I'll give a tempo. 1, 2, 3. Measure 4. Was that good? Probably better than beginning ninth graders would do? Yeah. So, this is the beginning of every day of my class. We do one of these. And my response to that would be to simply ask some questions and have them start to self-diagnose. So the first thing I would have asked them in that example that you guys all did, those were really good ninth grade mistakes, by the way. I heard a lot of the classics. Skipping rests, not participating, just choosing not to participate in the long notes, for example. And so I would probably have started with because this whole activity for me takes about 6 minutes at the beginning of every class. I throw up one exercise, we do it once, we sing the scale, we audiate, we do it once, I ask them some questions, teach them some tools for diagnosis, we try it a second time, we move on. No matter how good or bad it was, we just move on. So I would say things like, did we all arrive at measure 2 at the same time? And then you would get some of that, and then I would usually respond, if you don't know, then we probably didn't, okay? So you might have been guessing when measure 2 was, okay? So then they would usually say, no, we didn't all do it. And so then I would say, what did you hear instead? Well, some of us went to Ray sooner than everyone else. Oh, okay, all right, so that's a problem we can put on our list to solve. Did everybody hear that in measure 4, there should have been 2 beats of rest, but there was definitely not? Oh, yeah, so what did you hear instead? Well, somebody sang before measure 5. Oh, okay. All right, so I'm teaching them, because of course I am musically equipped enough to just go through and tell them all the mistakes. But today, because we're going to work on this for 6 minutes, I just want them to start being in the habit of detecting those. We'll solve a few, and we'll move on. So then have a chance to do that. This is all the very beginning of ninth grade. These are the types of things that I would do with the beginners. And we would go on and we would try it again, and then I would give them the following mindset or the following instruction. I said, okay, now we're going to try it again. Let's say you made 5 mistakes that first time. This time make 3. Let's try it again. And then I would explain to them, if we went from 5 mistakes to 3, what is that called? Progress. Okay? Because I'm not trying to train them that sight reading is a perfect or terrible scenario. I actually hate the term sight reading, but that's a whole different podcast. We're just reading. We're just reading. Next tool, Takadimi for rhythm. It solves the problem for my kids of how does this tricky rhythm go, rather than Mr. Muntz just demonstrating it for me. So we're going to do another little exercise here. Whoops. I hate chords, officially. All right. now you're going to officially hate me because I would like you to stand. All right. We are going to not only lean with it, but we are going to rock with it. So we're going to step this way and step this way and get your hips in it. Okay, here we go. And we're going to keep it going. Do you know Takadimi? Okay. So that's okay. We'll teach you the basics. We'll just do some basic ones. So I get the boys love this one actually more than the girls, which is funny. Amazing what can happen in choir, by the way, with the boys when the girls aren't in the room. It's really quite amazing what they are willing to do suddenly. So we have this, and I'll say, I will have taught them that if we divide the beat by 1, it's called ta. So let's try it. I'm simply going to show you a 1 on the beat, and you'd go ta with me. And do you hear that sound as taking up the whole beat, or is only a portion of the beat? That was a portion. Let's see if we can make it be a whole beat. Go. Ta, 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 ta. And then we're going to divide the beat by 2, and when we divide it by 2, it's called ta-di, 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 ta. And if I divide it by 3, taki, taki-da, 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 taki, taki-da, taki, ta. By 4, Takadimi, 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 tak. Okay. Now I have 2 hands, like most people. This side, it doesn't make me. This side is going to follow this hand, and this side is going to follow this hand. Ta, 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 ta. Right, you sit back down. So with the same time and energy that we might spend on singing solfege scales and singing different patterns of, I'm sure all of you do things like this with the do, re, mi, all those different patterns that kids learn. With the same amount of energy that we put into that, we're also putting that same energy into rhythmic syllables. I call them solfege syllables for rhythm. They are in the Indian system, the Indian classical music education, classical music training system. They function that way for the same reason, which is that they are syllables that are then memorized for a musical problem to solve. It gives us proportional logic, memorize patterns, rather than having anxiety over how to divide time by different fractions and all those things. It turns music into a math problem, which I don't think we want. These become the phonics of rhythm. The goal is students begin to hear the syllables in their head the same way they start to hear do, mi in their head. Students will eventually know how to advocate for what they want or need in order to get it right. So for example, because I don't tell them answers, we'll get to a tricky rhythm and they'll say things like, can we Takadimi this, right? Yes, of course you can. Take 30 seconds and work in your sections. That's how tricky rhythms are dealt with. So you're having trouble with this? Great, thank you for saying you're having trouble with. Take 30 seconds, circle up, fix the problem. See you in 30 seconds. And then they might throw a Takadimi in to solve a rhythmical problem. So here's another one. This is a sight reading factory level 8. This is what my 7th and 12th graders do every day. And this is where Takadimi really plays into their sight reading. So let's see if I can point out a couple things. Can we have our F again? Thank you. Do you see the altos third measure beat 3? Do, ti, do, so. You see where I am? Yeah. So even my advanced kids that do this every day, they're going to have trouble. They are not going to sight read this perfectly the first time. That's why I love that Sight Reading Factory goes all the way to level 8. I actually think of my job as the master carrot dangler. I want their exercise to always be a little too hard, but not so much too hard that they give up. So what we're doing is we're basically making these gradually harder throughout the school year in a variety of ways. So when they get to about February, March, my advanced kids are working on these level 8s, and they are not sight reading like no mistakes. They make all kinds of mistakes. But the difference is none of the mistakes intimidate them. because they know how to solve these problems, and they're going to get that time in class to go solve the problem, and then they love that they can come back together and do it. So I would probably hear my altos looking at that measure 3 in their small groups. They'd be working on it, and they might sing something like this. La. They might go, la and 2, la, takadi, so, and 2, and 3, and... That's probably how they would solve that. So what did they mix together? What did I do? What'd you hear? I mixed 3 tools. What'd you hear? Solfége, count singing, and Takadimi, all to solve different problems. The Takadimi solved the tricky little rhythm problem, combination subdivisions of beat. The count singing solved the how long does this note last problem. So those are the types of things that they would do. And then, of course, I would hear tenors. I'd probably hear the tenors over in measure 6. Do, dee, do, dee, until they felt like they had that. And then I would probably hear them go, takida, re, mi, fa, takida, re, mi, fa, re, mi, fa. And then their time would be up, and I would go, okay, now we're back at the beginning. And then when we get there, it would be correct. That's what would happen in our advanced class. Because my beginning kids are doing the same thing, but with level 2s and 3s when they're starting out at the beginning of the school year. Does this make sense so far? So I just gave this one away already, but the third tool is count singing. We use it for duration to solve the problem of where are we in the music. I have 8 whole notes in a row, and I am now lost. Anybody ever experienced that? Which is the most baffling thing to those of us who are good musicians, because we're the music teachers. This is the easy part. This is the easy part. How are you getting this wrong? You just sang 14 eighth notes over here, and you did it right, and now you've got 8 whole notes in a row, and you can't hang. This is actually not weird. This is actually not weird. So that's when I require them to use their counts, because when the rhythm looks easy, they check out. They think things like, oh, I got this. And in music, of course, once you think, I got this, you don't got this. You no longer got this because you were not on the train, so to speak. So we use our count singing for that. Solves the getting lost problem, the duration accountability. But when the notes are moving quickly, pitch and rhythm becomes too much sometimes for count singing. And this is where, like, because I was raised as a band kid. Band kids, anyone? Piano lesson kids? Yep. Orchestra? Okay. Anybody not have any instrumental background at all? Look around the room, guys. This is important. Do you see that no one is raising their hands? You ready for another offensive hot take? I think it's because we've been doing music education in a way for generations that unless you have musical instrument training, you're not going to make it in this room. My kids do, though. Okay. You do not. When I started at my school, the chamber choir at my school, if you were not a band kid, an orchestra kid, took piano lessons, or had voice lessons, no shot you're making it into my chamber choir. No shot. Now that's not true. Kids who come into 9th grade with no musical experience at all can do these things, and it's solving that equity problem. But that's also a different podcast. Okay, but when the notes are moving too quickly, sometimes we take away the count singing we learned in band, and we replace it with other things, like solfege or takadimi. It reduces some of that cognitive load. So the rule, and this is a really easy rule to write down and remember, for my kids, they will put in the counts if the note lasts longer than a beat. Cut and dry, as soon as it lasts longer than a beat, they're going to throw in their count singing. So I've got a simpler example here of how to use this. So if I'm a bass at the beginning, do and 2 and 3 and sol, la, so, mi, sol, la, and 2 and ti, do, is how they will sing it. They're singing the solfege syllable to solve their what does this note sound like problem. And as soon as they recognize that it is going to last a while, they throw the counts in. So that is a combination concept of those tools, and they can learn to do that at sight. In fact, this is just, again, kind of showing that I am also, I'm giving a presentation which makes it seem like I just know the answers to everything. I'm self-aware enough to know that that's what happens when someone gives a presentation. However, you should also know that I am constantly redoing all this stuff. Constantly trying to figure out what the most recent possible thing or way I could make it better. So the combining of solfege and count singing, for me, this is year 1. I'd never done it prior to this. And because I keep data on kids individually, and I grade their sight reading individually throughout the school year, it is exploding their literacy. And they were already good at it, but we were having trouble in years past of the guessing when the next note was going to happen, long note problem, and I just was beating my head against the wall. It's like my kids can read all these pitches, but they're never on time. They're never on time. And when I was in band, we used to do all this count singing stuff, and it worked great in there, but then in choir, there's Solfége, they've got all these other things to think about, and so I hadn't made them do it. And we started doing this year, and it's just nuts how much quicker they've gotten with these types of things. They all now arrive at measure 4 at the same time. Also, interesting choir culture thing. My seniors don't like this. I have to make them do it. The underclassmen don't know any better. So this is why these things take years sometimes. I do have to pick my battles. Like my upperclassmen can read things well, and so they don't understand why I'm making them do this new thing that's hard, which, by the way, 3 years ago. Whether you've newly discovered the show or you're a longtime listener, I would like to encourage you to become a paid subscriber, either on Patreon or Substack. Each works as a way for you to financially support this show and has different pros and cons, but in both subscription locations, you'll have access to my Google Drive, behind-the-scenes episodes, a direct line of communication to me that I will prioritize, and more importantly, it makes sure that I can keep doing this show forever. Those supporters are the reason that I'm able to do this show as a job and sustain it and treat it like a content generation machine for your benefit. So I would encourage you to head over there to either patreon.com/Choralosophy or choralosophy.substack.com and become a paid subscriber today. I added Takadimi into the toolkit. Same problem. The freshmen, they don't know any better. They are now seniors and they just do it. And the seniors at the time were like, we already are good at this, but we could be better. We could be better. I could be better, which, by the way, is one of the things that I think is really important. I keep data on kids, not because I want to tell them if they're good. And I tell this to the kids too. This is why we do this. We don't keep data so I can tell you who the best ones are, or I can tell you if you're good. I keep data so I can tell if I'm doing a good job. Because if our kids aren't getting better at all these things every year, what the heck am I getting paid for? So I want to be able to prove it, not to the administrator, not to the students, not to the parents. I want to prove it to myself. That my pedagogies are causing them to get better, and they're getting better over time, and they're getting better reliably, and I can prove it. That's my little data plug. You should know how they're doing. Another tool, fourth tool, functional vocal knowledge, and I'm getting close to your lunch break probably, so I'm going to start moving fast. Functional vocal knowledge is another tool. They've got to know how the voice works. All these things so far have been music literacy things, but I also think that music literacy is not separate from vocal technique. Because they can know, it's a muscle coordination thing that I talked about earlier. They can know that it's me, but if they don't know if that me happens, if they're a 10th grade tenor, up on an E natural in the tenor treble clef, and they don't know what it feels like to sing in their passaggio, for example, or how to modify a vowel, or how to find their head voice, or how to maybe choose falsetto if they're whatever, then it doesn't matter that they know what me is. It's still not going to come out as right. So this is where the vocal technique part is important. Ideally, if our kids can take voice lessons, awesome, that's great, but most of them can't, or don't, or won't. In our choir class, they can at least learn the basics of how the voice works, and of course they should. I like to encourage people to try to avoid the metaphors, like sing taller, for example. That doesn't really feel the same for everybody. Also would encourage people to avoid things like turn to your neighbor and make your face look the same. The reason for that is their bodies aren't shaped the same. And that might cause vocal tension or some problems that you might be able to avoid by simply telling them to, A, what is the anatomy of the vowel that you're trying to get to? What should your body parts be doing? And then also, does it sound like we're all singing the same vowel? So let me give you an example here. So here's what I teach kids for ah. Okay. We verify whether or not we're singing ah, not because our faces match, but because, again, borrowing information from linguistics, where there is an IPA symbol for various different types of ah. And it is not based on an opinion of a choir director. Those symbols are based on anatomical positions of the mouth, of the articulators. That's where those symbols come from. So for example, there is the IPA syllable that is the old-timey lowercase a with the whoop-de-boop scholarly terms that you're getting here today. And that anatomically refers to a pure vowel sound, overtone-rich vowel sound that is produced when we have the separation, more scholarly terms, where your earlobe skin touches your cheek skin, and if you release your jaw back there, a hole will appear that you can fit your finger in. That's got to be there for ah to happen. The next thing that has to happen is our jaw has to then be released into that position, and our lips have to stay unengaged. And then our tongue has to be at the front of our teeth and also relatively unengaged. And if all three of those things are happening, is what will come out. Okay, it's the anatomy of the vowel. Okay, so the other thing that I like to teach them, everybody take 2 thumbs. Anybody ever told their kids to open their mouth in choir? So it won't surprise you that I'll say, I think there's a better way to say it. Find your hole. Look what happens to... touche. Yeah. What? The cave. Yeah, I like that's probably less problematic. So find that, and then their mouth is open, like you can't, and then your lips are relaxed, etc. So that's going to happen naturally. But then raise your hand if you've got like people pleaser kids. So you're saying open your mouth, open your mouth, open your mouth to all the kids that are singing like this without moving their mouth, and then you got the people pleaser kid who's now going, right? So we also teach them how to tell if you're opening your mouth too far. Take your 2 thumbs. Jaw is just relaxed and closed. You should feel squishy up underneath the bone. Okay? And as you slowly let your jaw descend, you will get to a point where a muscle will engage, and that will no longer be squishy. It'll go tight and hard. Do you feel it? Can you get there? So if you go too far, it'll clinch. Yeah? You feeling it? Right? So what I teach them is if the hole, we check here, to the cave, we check in the cave to see if we're open enough, and we check under to see if we're open too far. Because that is going to be different. That's going to look different on the faces of every kid. But they can feel those things universally. So that's just an example of teaching the functional knowledge of the voice. And then lastly, I'll wrap this up with self-diagnosis. Try to coach, not correct. So these are some of my favorite phrases. What solfege syllable did you sing? Do. What's it supposed to be? Re. Can you fix it? Rather than. That's the wrong note at measure 22. Hey, tenors, you're flat. Hey, altos, can you stop cutting off late? Right? I've worked really hard because that was the model I was raised with. Of the teacher is the corrector, the conductor is the corrector of everything. And my environment was negative in my class because with the best intentions on my part, every time I come to talk to a kid, it's because something's wrong. I become the person who is there to tell them they're wrong. So now I've worked really, really hard to avoid ever doing that, ever. I'm not perfect. I still sometimes correct kids, but I try not to. And I use phrases like this. We're singing a chord, for example. Which note did you hear? Did that note belong there? Which note was wrong? Which notes were right? Do you hear a note that's too low? And then they start to answer these questions and self-diagnose. Were you in your head voice? Were you in your falsetto? Which one should you be in? Those types of questions. And the reality check is that kids singing badly, singing incorrectly, etc., whatever that means, is just so scary for kids. So this presentation is all about trying to set up an ecosystem in your class where they are learning to be vocal explorers. They are becoming curious about all the things that their voices are capable of doing, and class time is limited, and they need as many reps as possible. So using our time efficiently is important. I'm speeding through to the end if anybody wants to stick around. Okay, so with beginners, it can take a whole semester to do these things. So I like to normalize them making ridiculous noises early in the school year, because that gets us real far, real fast, because they're no longer scared to make noise. The self-diagnostic tool in particular, we have to intentionally craft a culture where the mistake becomes data to them. The mistake is not a sign of shame, it's not a badge of dishonor, it is just information. And that is easier said than done, because teenagers are teenagers and they hate themselves. We're at that stage of life. It is not an accident that the student mental health issues are at their highest, human mental health issues are at their highest in the teen years, because they're not really happy with who they are, and they haven't accomplished anything yet to make themselves proud of who they are, and so they're just in this really weird phase. So getting kids to buy into this not only is powerful for your choirs to be better, but it's also powerful for their own sense of self-worth, that they become problem solvers rather than mistake makers. Vocal freedom and technique improves as well once they are not hesitating anymore to sing. And this, I think I'll leave you with this. I already did the keep data thing. Yeah, so I'm going to leave you with this. When I'm working with student teachers and young teachers, I think one of the biggest things that we miss out on in vocal music education is the repetitions that we got, as I proved earlier, all of us got when we were instrumentalists, of how many times do we get to just practice the scale over and over and over until it just happens, automatically, etc. Now in a choir class, that's hard because it's like herding cats sometimes. So the classroom management part of this is really important. So this will be a tip that I'll wrap up with. When your choir is attempting any of this that you decide to try, or even in your current method that you do and it works for you and et cetera, more power to you, that's wonderful. But in your next repetition, you give an instruction. Let's say we're going to sing at measure 22, and we're going to go all the way to 42, and our goals are X, Y, whatever, right? Try this. Before they've even finished measure 42, you have 3 scenarios in your head for how you're going to respond instantly. Okay? They finish 42. The 3 scenarios are this. What do I say if they nailed it? Like way beyond expectations. They nailed it. They did better than I thought they were going to do. That was incredible. What are you going to say in that scenario? What are you going to say if it was like, meh, it was okay. It's fine. More to do, but that was fine. And then what are you going to say if it was a train wreck? So that as soon as they stop, you have questions for them. And there's no you going like, well, I think we'll go back to measure, right? Like, that was incredible. Can we do that again, but this time with dynamics? Or, you know what? That was pretty solid, but we didn't do dynamics this time. I think we could do dynamics. Go again. Repetitions, repetitions, repetitions. Then they start to solve these problems. And then, of course, if it's a train wreck, you might say something like, well, how many mistakes did you make? 9. How many mistakes did you make? I didn't even start at the right place. Those types of things. And then your response becomes, okay, well, let's do progress then. Let's just do it again. And let's see if we can make only 5. And this time we're at measure 22. And then we have something that is positive, something that we can build on. Because ultimately the goal is for them to have tools to solve these problems and for us to get out of the way. Thank you for having me. And this was fun. And I'm sorry for offending everyone. Okay, so as you might have heard there, towards the end of the presentation, and as I mentioned last week, I kind of ran out of time, so you might have heard me panicking there at the end and having to speed through some of the slides. So I'm just going to take a few minutes here to really complete this presentation and fill up some of the gaps that I had left in that presentation in Newcastle. And another reminder, of course, that you can see the entire uncut presentation in one fell swoop over there at Patreon or Substack for the paid subscribers. And you can also see the slides presentation that I used. All of my slides presentations from all of my past presentations are available there to the subscribers. So I started feeling the pressure of time right about when I got to the part of my presentation where I wanted to have the teachers there think about a reality check, which is that all of these things that we're teaching kids to do are very scary. They're very cringe. They are very uncomfortable. They're very outside of their normal social experience. And so singing and having it be wrong. So think about the double risk there. This is like a double trouble going on when we're asking kids to sing in choir, where not only are they doing something socially dangerous by opening up their voice and really exposing it to their peers and being seen as trying hard on something that's not super socially normal. But then on top of that, the double trouble is that they might even try that. Even if they get over that hurdle and try that, they might do it wrong, quote unquote wrong, and have somebody think it's wrong, or then they will think it's wrong, or the teacher will tell them it's wrong. And I'm not suggesting that we would never tell kids that something is incorrect. That is partly our job as educators, is to make sure that they know when the things that they are doing are correct or incorrect. But it doesn't have to come to them in that way. It's going to take some normalizing first at the beginning of your school year to create an ecosystem where their brain is rewired, so to speak, to be vocal explorers rather than even singers. I would rather them think of themselves as vocal explorers than singers, because so much of what we do is, the way I describe it, is like a sound laboratory. That's how I describe my classroom to students when they come in. This is a sound laboratory. And what do you do in a laboratory? You experiment with mixing chemicals. Well, in this room, you're going to experiment with mixing sounds. And in order to mix all the sounds that we're trying to mix, we're going to have to figure out all the noises you're capable of making. So then we You get to take it out of that kind of mental box that a lot of kids come to, at least to junior high and high school, with this idea of what singing sounds like, whether it be from their own pop music that they listen to or cultural music that they've grown up hearing, but it's usually Spotify. And they have this idea of what choir sounds like from maybe elementary school or middle school. And so they've got this jumbled mix of ideas, preconceived ideas and notions about what singing sounds like. And then we ask them to sing, and they're imitating something that we don't always want them to be imitating. And so in a lot of ways, I like to make it seem like they are shedding everything that they know and getting to the point where we start to experiment with what types of noises we can make. What are we capable of making? And then which of those sounds do we want to apply to this song? So a good example of this would be kids that come into a choir class from musical theater. They come in with an ooh kind of a sound, preloaded from musical theater style for the ooh vowel. And kids bring that into a choir song where that does not fit. And I used to say things like, well, that's the wrong vowel. Come on, guys, let's sing a beautiful ooh vowel. Well, that's, of course, belittling of their musical style that they enjoy, which is musical theater. And then calling it wrong or hey, let's sing a beautiful one implies that the one they were singing was not pretty. And so instead, what I've decided to do and kind of incorporate into the culture of the classroom is saying things instead like, so that's an interesting vowel you're using. I would call that the musical theater ooh. But since this is not musical theater, we're going to sing a different vowel for this style. That one's appropriate in that style, and this vowel might be instead for this style. And then they start to explore all the different versions of ooh vowels that they could potentially make. It makes a huge difference to whether or not they're responding with another sound that is exploratory and that is brave, instead of having their next sound be shy and scared because you just told them that the sound that they made wasn't beautiful the first time. So one of the reasons that we have to get them past the fear of noise making, and of course there's so many ways to do this. Part of this is the personality of the teacher. And it's important whenever I make presentations or make a podcast or anything about pedagogical concept, the personality of the teacher and the way that the classroom environment is almost infinitely variable in terms of what will work, what types of environments will work for this. So that's not really what I'm talking about. So this is not our classroom must mimic mine, like on episodes where I've shown you kind of windows into my classroom. That's not really ever the point. The point is the pedagogy itself. And so one of the reasons we need them to feel comfortable simply experimenting with different sounds is because they need a lot of repetitions to get these neural pathways, which take a lot of repetitions to insulate myelin sheaths around a neural pathway. Takes lots and lots of repetitions. And if you have short class time, like a lot of teachers complain about having, for example, for me, I have 44 minutes, 5 days a week. People would love to have that, but for me, that feels very short. I did most of my career with much more, 54 minutes until pretty recently. So 44 feels really, really short. And I know, because I know how the brain works, I know that I need my kids to get several positive, correct repetitions of almost every skill. And that includes learning and memorizing what solfege intervals sound like. That includes learning and memorizing what Takadimi syllables feel like inside of a beat when we're subdividing a beat. That means they need tons of repetitions to see and read music. They also need tons of repetitions to make beautiful sound. And in order to fit all of that into the amount of time that we have, then we have to have like a kind of a well-oiled machine going in terms of the cycles that happen between attempt. Sam! So the classroom specifics of your culture and the length of your class time is not really what I'm after here, because we're not all going to be the same. But the point I really want to drive home is that what matters is that the concepts we're talking about here in terms of tool use and requiring students use their tools rather than you trying to be the tool as the teacher, and all these concepts of normalization of noise, etc., normalization of experimentation of vocal sound are being applied consistently, and they get tons of cycles of attempt, diagnose, try again, repeat. Attempt, diagnose, try again, repeat. Attempt, diagnose, try again, repeat. Do I need to do it again? I don't think I do. But that those cycles are uninterrupted, I should say, as much as possible, so that kids get fresh feedback. I hate the fact that I'm about to compare human children to dogs, but when we're training dogs, their brains work the same way. They're wired the same way. If the feedback for a negative dog behavior, for example, happens 2 days later, they will not attach it to the bad behavior. They have to know right away that the thing that happened was not good. In the same way, good behaviors are wired that way. So if we hand the dog a treat right after they do something that they're supposed to do, they're going to more likely attach it to that behavior. Our human brains are more complicated, of course, than a dog's, but they work in the same basic way. When we're trying to teach kids something, they need the feedback to that thing very, very quickly, and then they need to apply that feedback to their next attempt very quickly, and that cycle continues. This will work wonders for your classroom management also because there's never downtime, and downtime is what causes kids oftentimes to get in trouble. So as I spoke recently with Kevin Lackey in a classroom management episode, I do want to echo what we talked about there, where not everybody's situation is the same. I agreed with Kevin. He has block periods where they're 90-something minutes. I would definitely not make the same statement about zero downtime if I had 90-minute blocks. But even if I did have 90-minute blocks, there would be a rehearsal mode portion of that 90 minutes. Like I would probably even teach my kids that this is now rehearsal mode. We are in rehearsal mode, everybody. We're going to stand up. Our music is going to be in front of us. We're going to have our pencil, and we are going to now enter a period of quick cycles of attempt, diagnose, try again, repeat, uninterrupted, completely silent in the rehearsal room, because in between every attempt, they need to be audiating. They need to be trying actively to hear these rhythmic and pitch patterns in their head, which means no talking. But the downtime is what leads to the talking. So this is why the cycles that I encouraged the people in the audience there recently to try, having your cycles set. And I'll just say them again here in case it wasn't as clear. So during the first attempt of something, you've already identified 3 possible next goals. 1 for if they nailed it, 1 for if there are still specific spots to fix, and 1 for if it was just a total train wreck, meaning there were so many mistakes that it wouldn't even be useful to point out these specific mistakes or to have them, in which case I usually just say pick 5. You made 5 mistakes apiece on average. This time only make 3. We're just going to make it. We're just going to make it another attempt, and it will hopefully be better. And then once we've narrowed down to less and less mistakes, then it becomes easier for the whole group to start diagnosing those few little flaws that are still there in the music. I definitely glossed over also the importance of keeping data. I did mention in the presentation that it is how we tell that we as teachers are doing a good job. I've seen quite a bit of discourse and conversation amongst social media music educators. Of course, I am one, so no disparaging being a social media influencer type person on music education. However, that's a way for me to understand and know kind of what attitudes and beliefs are out there. And one of those is that music is valuable just for music's sake, and therefore we shouldn't be treating it like other academic subjects and trying to do all this keeping of data on kids, because keeping data on their growth and measuring their skills like it's math, etc. These are the attitudes that I hear. The problem is, though, if we don't measure something, then we actually, I don't think we're going to survive as a field, because administrators who can't just hear that our choirs are getting better, for example, they can't tell just by listening. They're going to need to see something, so that's part of it. But I also don't think that we really actually know how individual kids are doing unless we evaluate them individually. That is something that I've probably gotten into more arguments online about, because I require kids to sing by themselves. It's not optional. It's like part of the class is that they're going to get feedback individually. Now, that does not mean stand up in front of the whole class on the first day of school and give a solo. That is not what that means, but they're going to have to show individual accountability throughout the year in a variety of situations, so that I can keep track of how they're doing, how their voice is changing, how their literacy is growing, different aspects of how their vocal muscular development is progressing, etc. And I think that tests and assignments and individual feedback on vocal and literacy progress, which are our 2 main jobs, I think. And there's a whole episode, what is our main job, that I have on the feed. You can go back and check that if you're curious. I think that those are our two main jobs, and we should keep track of how we're doing, in my opinion. Voice change tracking is also, of course, important, especially for the boys, but for the girls too. That's another episode. Bridget Sweet, go find it on the episode. The girls' voices change too is a really, really important concept. And oftentimes kids will hide that information from you because they just feel it as frustration. But if we seek it out from them by keeping track of that data over the course of a school year, it can do wonders for them feeling like they matter in the rehearsal, even if it is scary at first for them to sing by themselves. Ultimately, individual work is a critical part of this ecosystem that I'm describing in this series, and it isn't really optional for this type of learning, because in order to know that you have the music in your head. You have to learn how to vocalize it. You individually have to learn how to vocalize it. In fact, just today, we're getting closer to our solo and ensemble practice, or our solo and ensemble performance. And there's a lot of kids who are kind of behind the other members of their group in terms of learning their part. And I gave them all the speech today, which I'm about to outline to you, which is every single person, if we're going to be ready for these ensembles, are going to have to go through their music and find their oh crap moments. And oh crap moments, or those of you who don't know that term, I've not used it on the podcast before, I use it in class, is when I teach them to sit down, open up their book, and look through the music and find oh crap moments. Oh crap moments are defined as moments that I can't hear happening in my head when I look at them. And teaching the kids to look for those moments is crucial. And then they know how to respond once they find them. So oftentimes you're singing a song that has a simple melody. Everybody's singing the melody and everybody's got that down. A couple weeks into the song, into the rehearsal, they know that. They can glance at it. They know what that's supposed to sound like. So they're singing words. They look at those oh crap moments for when the music inside their head just shuts off when they get there. Now, because it's a cappella, right? So they're singing through it in their head. I don't know how that sounds. Or we pull out our solfege and we go real slow and we go faster and faster and faster individually. But once they do that individually, they're able to sing through that line fluently, and they're not going to lose track of that part anymore. They're not going to start drifting off to somebody else's part because now it's playing louder in their own head than the other person's part is in the room. So this is an extremely important part, and if they don't do that on their own, they will continue to follow someone, like forever. So ultimately, the promise that I'm making here with this series is that if you invest in this concept, even in the ecosystem concept in general, there's tons of places for you to have little differences, of course, with how you implement any of these things. But it's the core principle, which is that kind of has to hold in order for this to work, which is that kids need to be learning to hear music in their head without the supply or the source of an external instrument playing it for them or a teacher singing it for them. Once we get over that hurdle, the speed, the lack of stress will save you so much time and headache, because you won't be sitting around after school anymore making rehearsal tracks for hours and hours and hours just so your kids can do 3 songs at a concert. That's going to be a thing of the past in your life if you invest in this concept. Another promise is that if students can decode independently, your rehearsal pace will start to fly and become incredibly efficient. Your final product will improve, but that's not the point. The point is not so you have a better concert. The point is that you are building independent, thinking, self-sufficient musicians. Teenagers are powerful and capable of much more than we often give them credit for. And of course, all students deserve a skill that they can take with them. They deserve to be assessed and given individual feedback on their progress in school. That is a moral hill I'm willing to die on. And yes, even in choir. Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. 1, use the promo code. That's the biggest one. At Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code, and of course now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.